Introduction. T-10 minutes. The air at Cape Canaveral was thick and heavy with the heat of a Florida morning. It was July 22, 1962. On the launch pad sat the Mariner 1, a high-tech spacecraft designed to be the first American mission to reach another planet. Millions of dollars and years of work by the world's smartest scientists were strapped to a rocket filled with enough fuel to reach the stars. The countdown continued. 5 minutes. 3 minutes. 1 minute. Ignition. The rocket roared to life. It climbed into the blue sky, a pillar of fire and hope. But less than 5 minutes into the flight, something went wrong. The rocket began to wobble. It drifted off its path. It wasn't heading toward Venus anymore. It was heading toward a crash that could hurt people on the ground. At 293 seconds after launch, a safety officer pushed a button. The rocket exploded into a ball of flame over the Atlantic Ocean. Years of work and millions of dollars vanished in a puff of smoke. When the engineers looked for the cause, they didn't find a broken engine or a leaky fuel tank. They found a tiny error in the guidance code. A single hyphen, a small overbar symbol, had been left out of the instructions. One tiny, silly mistake in a sea of complex math had caused the most powerful machine on Earth to fail. If you have ADHD, your life probably feels a lot like the Mariner 1. You have a high-powered brain. You are smart, creative, and capable of reaching the stars. But for some reason, the guidance system keeps glitching. You miss a small detail and the whole day explodes. You forget one deadline, and your career feels like it's wobbling off course. You aren't lacking power. You aren't lacking fuel. You are missing the overbar, the internal system that keeps everything on track. This struggle has a name. It is called a breakdown in executive function. The CEO, WHO, never shows up for work. Imagine a large company. It has a sales team, a creative team, a legal team, and a janitor. Each of these people is great at their job. But imagine there is no CEO. There is no boss in the corner office to tell the sales team when to start, or the creative team what to focus on. Without a boss, the creative team might spend all week drawing pictures of cats, while the sales team sits in the break room eating donuts. The work is there and the talent is there, but nothing gets done. In your brain, the CEO lives in a spot right behind your forehead, called the prefrontal cortex. This is where executive function happens. It is the part of your brain that handles the boss tasks. Starting, picking up the pen and writing the first word. Focusing, staying on the path even when a squirrel runs by. Planning, seeing the steps needed to finish a big project. Remembering, keeping a phone number or a task in your head long enough to use it. Controlling emotions, not melting down when things get hard. Shifting, moving from one task to another without getting stuck. Monitoring, noticing when you are drifting off course before the rocket explodes. When you have ADHD, your internal CEO is often out to lunch. Or maybe the CEO is busy looking at a cool bird outside the window while the rest of your brain is screaming for directions. This creates what experts call the knowledge-performance gap. This gap is the most frustrating part of living with ADHD. It is the distance between what you know you should do and what you actually do. You know you should pay that bill. You know you should start that report. You even know how to do it. But when you sit down to start, your brain feels like it's trying to push two magnets together that keep sliding apart. You aren't lazy. You don't have a willpower problem. You have a boss problem. And because the boss isn't doing their job, you end up paying the ADHD tax, the lost money, lost time, and lost trust that happens when the guidance system fails. Meeting Maya. Maya Rodriguez knows this feeling all too well. At 34 years old, Maya is a senior graphic designer at a busy agency in Chicago. On paper, she is a success. She is creative, quick-witted, and can design a logo that makes clients cry with joy. She is a mother to a high-energy 4-year-old named Leo, and is married to David, who tries his best to be patient. But if you stepped into Maya's home office, you would see a different story. On this particular Tuesday, Maya is staring at her computer screen. She has 47 browser tabs open. One is for a client project due in 2 hours. One is a recipe for chicken tacos she'll never make. 10 are for a new hobby, making handmade candles, that she spent $200 on last night and will likely forget by next week. The internal radio in her head is turned up to full volume. Leo needs new shoes. I forgot to email my boss back. Did I leave the oven on? Why am I like this? In the background, she can hear Leo crying because he can't find his favorite toy. Her phone pings. It's a third email from a client asking for a quick update. Maya feels a cold wave of panic wash over her. She wants to move. She wants to be the person who gets up, handles the client, finds the toy, and finishes the design. Instead, she sits perfectly still. She is paralyzed. As she reaches for her cold coffee, her hand brushes against an unopened envelope. She opens it and feels her stomach drop. It's a letter from the IRS. She made a simple filing error 6 months ago. Because she forgot to reply to the first letter, she now owes a $500 penalty. The ADHD tax has struck again. Maya feels a hot tear roll down her cheek. She doesn't feel like a senior designer or a driven adult. She feels like a failure. She believes her diagnosis is just an excuse for being messy, and she is terrified that one day her boss and her family will realize she's just faking it. Maya is stalled. She is a high-powered rocket sitting on the launch pad with a missing hyphen in her code, watching the countdown clock hit 0 while she stays stuck on the ground. The transformation from stalled to driven. The book you are holding is the guide Maya needs. It is the guide you need. We aren't going to talk about fixing your brain. Your brain isn't broken, it's just wired differently. You don't need a new brain. You need a better scaffolding to support the one you have. Think about a tall building being repaired. The building itself is strong, but it needs a metal frame on the outside, the scaffolding, so the workers can reach the high spots. This book will help you build external scaffolding. Since your internal CEO is often unreliable, we are going to build systems outside your head that do the boss's job for you. By the time you finish these pages, you will move from being stalled to being driven. What does it mean to be driven? Being driven doesn't mean you never get distracted. It doesn't mean you become a robot who never loses their keys. It means you understand how your machine works. It means you stop fighting against your nature and start working with it. A driven person knows how to prime the engine using dopamine. They know how to use visual clocks to see time before it slips away. They know how to break a giant, scary task into ridiculously small steps so the brain doesn't shut down. Most importantly, a driven person has replaced the cycle of shame and self-loathing with a toolkit of practical habits. The transformation looks like this. Instead of reacting to fires all day, you become proactive. Instead of heroic burnout, working for 12 hours straight and then crashing for a week, you find a sustainable pace. Instead of a doom pile of bills, you have systems that handle the boring stuff automatically. Instead of feeling like a faker, you perform at the level of your actual intelligence. This isn't a dream. It is a biological reality. Your brain is capable of change. This is called neuroplasticity. By using the tools in this book, you are actually rewiring your executive engine. You are teaching the workers in your brain how to function even when the CEO is looking at birds. Why this works? You might have tried planners before. You might have downloaded 5 different productivity apps that now sit unused in a folder on your phone. You might think, I've tried to be organized and it never sticks. The reason those things failed is that they were designed for farmer brains. Most productivity advice is written by people who don't have ADHD. They tell you to just do it or make a list. For an ADHD brain, a list can be a source of terror, not a source of help. This approach is different. It is built on the interest-based nervous system. We aren't going to use boring farmer tools to manage a hunter brain. We are going to look at how history's greatest minds, people like Leonardo da Vinci and Thomas Edison, manage their own chaotic, brilliant thoughts. We will use evidence-based science and real-world stories to show you exactly how to bridge the gap between stalled and driven. The journey ahead. We are going to start by looking at why we get stuck in the first place. We'll visit Leonardo da Vinci in his studio and see why he struggled to finish his most famous paintings. We'll learn about the wall of awful, the emotional barrier that makes starting a simple task feel like climbing Mount Everest. Then, we will dive into the biology. We'll talk about dopamine and why your brain is constantly searching for flavor in a world of bland tasks. You will learn how to build your own dopamine menu to keep your engine running without needing a crisis to get you moving. We will look at the 4 pillars of the external brain. 1. Capture, how to get ideas out of your head before they vanish. 2. Organize, how to keep your environment from becoming a chaos factory. 3. Prioritize, how to tell the difference between urgent and important. 4. Execute, how to actually cross the finish line. You will see Maya's journey as she stops trying to willpower her way through life and starts using scaffolding. You'll watch her handle late fees, work deadlines, and the ADHD tax until she finally feels like the boss of her own life. We will also tackle the hard mode of ADHD, the emotions. We'll talk about why rejection hurts so much and how to stop the emotional roller coaster from derailing your entire week. Finally, we will look at how to maintain this for the long haul. Life will always throw fires at you, just like the fire that burned down Thomas Edison's factory. But being driven means knowing how to rebuild the next morning. The rocket is on the launch pad. The fuel is in the tank. You have the power, the creativity, and the intelligence to reach any goal you set. All we need to do is fix the guidance code. We need to put the overbar back in the instructions. Your potential is not the problem. Your potential is infinite. It's time to stop stalling and start driving. The countdown is beginning. 10, 9, 8. Chapter 1. The day the Mona Lisa almost wasn't. In the final months of his life, an old man sat in a quiet room in France, surrounded by thousands of pages of notes. He was arguably the most brilliant person to ever live. He had mapped the human heart, designed flying machines centuries before the first airplane, and understood the movement of water better than any scientist of his time. Yet, as he looked at the stacks of unfinished drawings and the paintings that sat half done in the corner, he picked up a pen and wrote a sentence that dripped with sadness. Tell me if anything was ever done. Leonardo da Vinci, the man who painted the Mona Lisa, died believing he was a failure. He didn't feel like a genius. He felt like a man who could never quite finish what he started. He felt stalled. To understand how this happens, we have to go back to 1481. Leonardo was 30 years old and living in Florence, Italy. He was the talk of the town. He was handsome, strong, and could sing like an angel. The monks at the monastery of San Donato a Scopeto wanted the best artist in the world to paint an altarpiece for them. They chose Leonardo. They offered him a good contract and a lot of money. The project was called The Adoration of the Magi. It was supposed to be his big break, the moment he proved he was the master of his craft. Leonardo didn't just start painting. His brain didn't work that way. Instead, he started sketching. He drew horses from 10 different angles. He drew the way light hit the folds of a sleeve. He drew faces showing every possible emotion: joy, fear, surprise, and wonder. He filled pages with ideas. He was on fire with the possibilities of the project. But then something shifted. The newness of the idea started to wear off. The monks began to ask for updates. They wanted to see the actual painting on the wood panel, not just more sketches of horses' legs. Every time Leonardo looked at the blank panel, he didn't see a canvas. He saw a problem. He saw 100 different ways he could mess it up. He saw the boring parts of the job, the mixing of the base paints, the hours of repetitive brushstrokes, and his brain simply refused to engage. He would walk into his workshop, look at the panel, and then find himself distracted by something else. Maybe he would spend the day studying how a bird's wing moved. Maybe he would spend hours thinking about a new type of canal system for the city. He wasn't being lazy. He was working harder than anyone else in Florence. But he wasn't working on the one thing he was supposed to be doing. By 1482, the monks had run out of patience. Leonardo had been working for over a year, and the painting was a mess of brown outlines and unfinished figures. When an offer came to move to a new city, Milan, Leonardo packed his bags and left. He abandoned the painting. He abandoned the contract. He left the monks of San Donato with a giant unfinished piece of wood and a reputation that he was unreliable. We often think of geniuses as people who sit down and produce masterpieces through sheer willpower. We think that if someone is smart enough, they shouldn't have trouble finishing a task. But Leonardo's life tells a different story. It tells the story of a brain that is high-powered but has a broken steering wheel. The myth of the lazy genius. There is a common belief that haunts almost every adult with ADHD. It is the idea that if you just cared more, you would get the work done. Friends, bosses, and parents have likely told you some version of this your whole life. They say you're so smart. If you just applied yourself, you'd be unstoppable. This is the myth of willpower. It suggests that productivity is a choice, like choosing what color shirt to wear. It assumes that if you aren't doing the work, it's because you are choosing to be lazy, or you don't value the goal enough. But look at Leonardo. He cared deeply about his art. He cared about his reputation. He wanted the money the monks were offering. He wasn't lazy, he was a polymath who worked until his eyes ached. The problem wasn't a lack of want. The problem was a breakdown in his brain's CEO. In the world of science, we call this the knowledge-performance gap. This is the space between knowing what you need to do and actually doing it. Most people think this gap is filled by willpower. For the ADHD brain, that gap is a canyon, and willpower isn't a strong enough bridge to cross it. When you are in a stalled state, you aren't sitting around enjoying yourself. You are likely stuck in a state of high-stress paralysis. You know the deadline is coming. You know the consequences will be bad. You might even have the tools in your hand. But your brain's internal governor has stepped on the brakes, and no matter how hard you push the gas, the car won't move. Maya's morning at the edge. Maya Rodriguez sat in a glass-walled meeting room at her marketing agency, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. In 5 minutes, her boss and 2 senior partners would walk through that door. They were expecting to see a mood board for a new national campaign. Maya had known about this meeting for 2 weeks. She had even spent several late nights thinking about it. She had looked at hundreds of images online. She had read articles about color theory. She had even bought a new set of expensive markers because she thought they would help her get started. But as she looked down at the table, there was no mood board. There was only a blank piece of foam core and a pile of unorganized printouts she had scrambled to grab from the office printer 3 minutes ago. The shame was so thick she could almost taste it. I'm a fraud, she thought. I'm 34 years old, I have a mortgage and a kid, and I'm about to get fired because I couldn't put some pictures on a board. She wasn't lazy. She had spent the last 3 nights barely sleeping, paralyzed by the weight of the task. Every time she sat down to do it, her brain would white out. The task felt too big, too important, and yet somehow impossible to touch. She felt like she was standing at the bottom of a skyscraper, trying to jump to the roof in a single bound. Then the door handle turned. In a flash of pure adrenaline, Maya's brain finally clicked. The not now had finally become right now. She grabbed her glue stick and her markers. As her boss walked in and started the introductions, Maya began talking. She spoke with a level of energy and passion that masked her panic. While she talked, she began pinning images to the board. She was magic tasking. By the end of the 30-minute meeting, the board looked decent. Her boss smiled. Great work, Maya. You always come through in the clutch. Maya smiled back, but inside she felt like she was dying. Her hands were shaking. Her head throbbed. She had survived, but she knew she couldn't keep living like this. This wasn't being driven. This was a heroic burnout cycle. She was a high-performance engine that only started when the building was on fire. The wall of awful. Why does a simple task, like gluing pictures to a board or finishing a painting, feel like a life or death struggle? Think of every task you have avoided as a brick. Every time you try to start a task and fail, you add a brick to a hidden structure in your mind. Over the years, these bricks build what experts call the wall of awful. The wall of awful is made of 4 types of bricks: failure, the memory of all the times you didn't finish; frustration, the feeling of being stuck while everyone else seems to move forward easily; shame, the belief that you are fundamentally broken or bad because you can't do simple things; rejection, the fear of what people will think of you when they see your unfinished work. When you look at a task, you aren't just looking at the task itself. You are looking at it through the wall of awful. To get to the task, you have to climb the wall. Climbing that wall is exhausting. It takes more energy to get over the wall than it does to actually do the work. This is why task paralysis happens. Your brain sees the wall of awful and decides it's too dangerous to climb. It triggers a freeze response. You aren't procrastinating because you want to watch YouTube videos. You are watching YouTube videos because your brain is trying to hide from the emotional pain of the wall. Leonardo da Vinci's wall was massive. He was a perfectionist. He didn't just want to paint a picture, he wanted to capture the very soul of nature. Every time he picked up a brush, he was facing the failure bricks of all his previous abandoned projects. He was facing the shame of disappointing his patrons. The more he cared about the work, the taller the wall became. The internal governor. Imagine you are driving a car that has a governor installed on the engine. A governor is a device that limits how fast the car can go. No matter how much you floor the accelerator, the car will not go over 20 miles per hour. For neurotypical people, their internal governor is set to the speed of the task's importance. If a task is important, the governor lets the engine go fast. For the ADHD brain, the internal governor is set by interest and urgency, not importance. 1. Interest. If the task is brand new and exciting, the governor lets you go 100 miles per hour. This is why Leonardo was so productive at the start of the project. 2. Urgency. If the deadline is 5 minutes away and your job is on the line, the governor lets you go 100 miles per hour. This is why Maya was able to magic task during her meeting. But if the task is merely important but not exciting or urgent, the governor stays at 0. You can push the pedal to the floor. You can scream at yourself. You can cry. But the engine won't engage. This is the stalled state. It is a biological mismatch between your intentions and your brain's engagement system. You are trying to drive a car that literally won't move until it smells smoke. Breaking the cycle. If you are reading this, you are likely tired of the smoke. You are tired of the heroic burnout that comes from only working when you are in a state of panic. You want to be driven, but you want that drive to come from a place of calm, consistent power, not from a house fire. The first step in moving from stalled to driven isn't learning a new calendar system or buying a better planner. Those things are great, but they won't work if you are still trying to climb the wall of awful with your bare hands. The first step is forgiveness. You have to look at the unfinished paintings in your life, the half-done projects, the unreturned emails, the doomed piles of laundry, and realize that they aren't evidence of a character flaw. They are evidence of a brain that was trying to protect itself from the wall of awful. Leonardo da Vinci spent his life fighting his own brain. He didn't have the science we have today. He didn't know about dopamine or the prefrontal cortex. He just knew that he was different. But here's the truth that the world forgets. Even though Leonardo left the Adoration of the Magi unfinished, his distractions changed the world. While he was avoiding that painting, he was learning about anatomy. He was learning about physics. He was becoming the person who would eventually paint The Last Supper. His stalls were not empty time. They were part of a larger, more complex engine that simply needed a different way to be driven. What is possible? Imagine waking up on a Tuesday morning. You have a list of things to do. Some of them are boring. Some of them are big. In the old way, the stalled way, you would look at that list and feel a cold knot in your stomach. You would spend 3 hours prepping to work, which really means scrolling through your phone while your anxiety levels rise. You would wait until 4 p.m., when the pressure becomes unbearable, and then you would work in a frantic, sweaty blur until you collapsed. Now, imagine a different version. You look at the list. You see the wall of awful, but you don't try to climb it. Instead, you have a set of tools, a scaffolding, that helps you walk right through it. You know how to trigger your brain's interest without needing a crisis. You know how to break a task down so it doesn't look like a skyscraper. You move through your day with a sense of flow. You finish at 5 p.m., and instead of feeling like you just survived a car wreck, you feel energized. You have time for your family. You have time for your hobbies. You have mental clarity. This isn't a fairy tale. This is what happens when you stop trying to fix your brain and start building a system that supports it. In the chapters to come, we are going to look at the biology of why your governor is set the way it is. We are going to learn how to build the external scaffolding that Thomas Edison used to turn his chaotic ideas into an invention factory. We are going to look at how to manage the ADHD tax that is draining your bank account and your self-esteem. You are a high-performance machine. You were never meant to be a slow-moving, farmer brain. You are a hunter in a world of fences. You are a divergent thinker in a world of straight lines. Leonardo da Vinci died wishing he had done more. But we have the benefit of looking back and seeing that his life was a masterpiece, not because he was perfect, but because he never stopped trying to understand the world. Your life is not defined by the Magi paintings you left unfinished in Florence. It is defined by the person you are becoming as you learn to drive your own unique, powerful mind. The stalled phase of your life is ending. The driven phase is just beginning. Let's get the engine started. Without the fire this time. Chapter 2. Why does the easiest task feel impossible? The silver lever was nothing special to look at. It was just a thin piece of metal stuck to the side of a glass box. It looked like something you might find on a cheap toy or an old machine in a basement. But in 1954, inside a quiet room at McGill University, that lever became the most important object in the world to a small white rat. James Olds and Peter Milner were two researchers who wanted to understand how the brain learns. They had a plan to put a tiny wire, an electrode, into a specific part of a rat's brain. They thought that if they gave the brain a tiny zap of electricity, when the rat went to a certain corner of its cage, the rat would learn to avoid that corner. They expected the rat to feel a little bit of discomfort and stay away. But something went wrong. Or, as it turns out, something went very right. The wire didn't land where they intended. It slipped. Instead of hitting the area of the brain that handles fear or avoidance, it landed in a spot called the septal area. When the researchers pressed the button to send the zap, the rat didn't run away. It didn't look hurt. It didn't look scared. Instead, it stayed exactly where it was. It looked like it wanted more. Olds and Milner were confused. They decided to let the rat control the zaps. They hooked the wire up to that little silver lever. If the rat pressed the lever, it got a tiny pulse of electricity straight into its brain. What happened next changed everything we know about motivation. The rat started pressing the lever. Then it pressed it again. And again. It began pressing the lever 2,000 times every hour. The rat stopped eating. It stopped drinking water. It ignored other rats. It didn't care about sleep. It would walk across an electric floor that gave its paws painful shocks just to reach that silver lever. The rat was willing to start.